G'day. Welcome to another Outback Lens Tuesday Night Live. I'm your host, JD. Thanks to our title sponsor, Outback Optics. I hope you've been going well this week in your corner of this great land. A bit of stormy weather down in the Darling Downs this week. We had a good bit of rain today. As you can see, I've got a few bang sticks out today. So I just thought I'd do a disclaimer straight up for the Facebook and social media boffins that like to analyze everything we do when we're looking at fun stuff. I'm licensed for all these products by my government authority, and in no way am I showing somebody how to modify these items. So that said, we're all clear here. This particular one's clear. This particular one's clear. I've checked that before the show, and I've got some devices there to show we have empty chambers. Thanks for tuning in. Hope we got some live. Let me check what's going on Facebook on this screen here. And don't look like we've got a mountain of people, but we'll press on anyway. So what are we talking about this week? This week we're talking about scope height and is it relevant in 2024? And what I really mean by that is scope height over your ball. So as you can see here, the scope sitting high above this ball. So that's what we want to talk about, because it can be a touchy subject for some. When you go into retail shop land or your local store, you may find that the guy behind the counter or you yourself might be of the old, mindset that's been passed down, which is you've got to have your optic as close as you can to the barrel. And there is some good theory behind it. So I'm just going to break that down. And always I want to start this framing with where I'm coming from when I'm discussing this. So once again, we're coming from a very average user of these products. We're not talking necessarily competition users, but we're talking great general advice for somebody who is an average hunter or a cull shooter, or they're very much involved in the recreation side of things. So someone who's not a professional or looking to win an Olympic medal. If we keep that lens in mind when we're looking at discussing this, I think you'll find that will be really easily explained. So without further waffle, I'm going to get into a little bit. So I'm going to break it down into a few points. And like always, we don't want to get too technical. We just want to get a great basic understanding and just sort of start to scratch the surface of some of the technical issues out of interest. So in front of me here, I have a trusty old Ruger 77. I've got a 3-12 by 56 Endeavour. And I'd like to say that there's probably at its smallest point, we're going to say 3 to 4 millimeters there of scope clearance. And this is what I would say is a very traditional setup. It's a traditional configuration bang stick. It has that real rifleman style stock, a flat stock. It's got a medium contour barrel. It's in 22 to 50, which is very much a caliber that's been used across Australia for decades, particularly for night cull work. So I look at this and think, great, that's probably how my dad set a firearm up. It's probably how his dad set it up. And it's probably how many of you guys have set one up. And it is a great way. But I want to talk about some, I'm not going to call them myths, because it's more of I'm trying to find the word to describe it, more of a modern. So I was always encouraged that when you buy an optic, no matter the lens size and the configuration, when you mount it, you want to buy the appropriate rings that get that optic as close as you can to the barrel, which means sometimes, you do the old piece of paper check, you're getting a piece of paper and that's just a clearance. Now that's great. And there's a lot of advantages to that. One of the advantages that was always said to me and in my experience, and some of that advantage in that discussion had been your bore line versus your scope line. Basically, what if you can imagine a line going through the middle of your optic going out to the target, and exactly the same through the center of the bore. Keeping them close together will make you more accurate is the general gist of the reason why we want to do that. Now, in my experience, and from talking to great many people and fitting many optics myself for other people, what you tend to find is that works for some, but not others. So I guess we need to consider some other points down this road. And one of them's going to be actually, what we'll do is I'll go across the key subjects or the key headings, and then we'll circle back and explain them out a little bit more. So I made some notes here, so I want to make sure we get this one really, really, really good. So generally, we're going to talk about impact and trajectory, I'll get it right, comfort and consistency of the package and the setup. And that's really important because I believe this is more important than quite a lot of other aspects. We're going to look at, again, some of those longer range implications for those people that want to push their bang stick out or make those shots a little bit further out. I'll show you how to measure your scope height and potentially what you'd need to do to input that data into a ballistic solver of some description. And in general, we'll just wrap it up about, again, that lens of who we're talking about. We'll wrap it up about what my thoughts are, whether it's relevant in 2024. G'day, Dougie. Thanks for tuning in, mate. I started talking about the trajectory, we'll get it right, basically, and how that intersects with how high your rifle is. I find this a non-event for myself in most scenarios for again, an average user. The only time that we really need to worry about the point of aim versus point of impact is really going to be at the extreme short end of the scale. Where I mean that is, if you have this particular machine, it's zeroed at 100 meters. If I was then going to take a shot 10 meters, I guess there's going to be some implications then about parallax and point of impact versus point of aim. Because it's so close, your optic's going to be looking in a different spot to where your bullet's going to be. And I actually did some sums on this to show you, which I'll work through in a tick. But overall, any distances past your zero distance, the bore height the scope height is going to have minimal effect on your accuracy. Minimal, I'll say that again. At close range, if you have a really high optic over the top of your ball, and I'm going to exaggerate here, 3, 4, 5 inches high, you may have, or you will have, at very close range, at shorter ranges below where your zero is, you will have some issues then. So I want to talk about pig shooting. If you have a bang stick set up for hull work at 100, 150 meters, and then something pops out at 10 meters, well, yeah, you're going to have some issues there. There's going to be a significant difference between point of impact and point of aim. So in that scenario, again, how many times does that happen for an average person? An average person goes to do whatever, whether let's use someone on the back of the ute with a spotlight at night. Yeah, that happens from time to time. Does it mean you miss 1 or 2 pigs or 1 or 2 foxes? Sometimes, yes or no. That'll be dependent on how you're working. So for most people, it's not going to be a high percentage issue. If you know you're going to chase pigs, well, you're probably taking the appropriate bang stick to do the job. In these podcasts or these lives, we like to try and frame everything. If you're new to the live stream, we always try and frame everything we can to give us a point of relevance. And we're talking about the average hunter, the average shooter, the average recreational user in Australia. And what you're probably going to find is that if I know I'm going to chase pigs that day, I'm taking a 30-30 lever action. I know I'm going to be chasing pigs at 25 meters most of the day or night. So I've taken the appropriate equipment. So again, when we talk about the issue of being too close and the scope being too high and having an error in our system, it's probably negligible for most people. So let's talk about the opposite end of the scale. If I'm talking distances past my zero range, and I've got that exaggerated high scope, or I've got an inch gap off the barrel between my objective bell and my barrel, how much difference does it actually make to my holdover or my zero out there, or my ability to hit that target? That's probably a better way to explain it. And the answer is very little. It makes a little impact. In actual fact, when you start talking about extreme distances, will have more of an impact than. I just ran some numbers. So I got my Kestrel. Let me get it out here for you. Oops, I dropped my notepad. Hang on. I got it. So I got my trusty Kestrel. I'm just going to turn it back on for you. 5700 Elite. Elite is the one that I use. 5700 Elite. Yep, that's the one. So I plumbed in some data. This is my 22. Doing 1,103 feet a second. I've got a 50 meter zero, and I've done some extreme testing here. At 25 meters, I need to, if I can get it, I did this again last week. So you'll see there that I need to go down 0.1 of a mil, 0.01 of a mil, so nothing. I basically wouldn't, unless I'm shooting a quarter inch target at 25 meters, I probably wouldn't really adjust anything. So that ball height is set at 2.36 inches on my particular optic and setup, which is a setup that looks very, very similar to this one back here. As you can see, it's quite high, and I'll measure that for you. So this is an example of a higher end setup. If I go through the center of the ball there, so yeah, look, I'm definitely at about 62 mil in that scenario there, but we'll go through that again a little bit later. It doesn't make a lot of difference for this particular correct information. In other words, I've told the ballistic solver my correct scope height. But if I wind that up to, and I'll read the notes here. If I wind that up to 3.5 inches, my scope height, it makes half a mil, 0.57 up I would need to hold at 25 meters. So you can see that shorter range, half a mil's a decent amount. So that would make a difference. But when I push it out, and again, I use my Kestrel to do this, I pushed it out to a 565 meter shot with my rimfire. So at 2.36 inches being inputted into my Kestrel, I get a ballistic calculation of 34.86 mils up. But when I drop that to, I should say, increase my bore height to 3.5 inches, like I did in the same short range scenario, my ballistic solver recalculated that I'd need 34.33 mils of elevation. So realistically, there's not a whole lot of variance between there, not enough to make a massive difference. And even at 100, when I run that scenario through again at 100 meters for that rimfire, it only makes 0.29 of a mil difference. So that's 2 clicks on a dial, or one little hash mark, depending on what reticle you're using and what those increments are. So I hope that's a bit of an understanding of how it affects trajectory. So to sum that up, unless you do an extreme short range shooting with the setup that you've got, say at 100 meters zero, your scope height is negligible. It doesn't make that much of a difference when it comes to what you're going to do out there. We now understand that it doesn't impact trajectory that much. There's not a lot to talk about there. So, maybe some of those old ways of thinking don't calculate necessarily for you and how you use it in 2024. When we go and look at adjustments, if you have a really high mounted optic, again, like the one that I see here, you may not have enough adjustment to be able to do a close range zero. So what that means, if you want to zero 22 at 25 meters or less, 25 yards, and you've got a, 1.5 inch gap between the barrel and the optic, what can happen in that scenario is you physically won't have enough clicks in your optic to be able to get zero that optic at 25 meters. So when it comes to adjustment, that's probably the main thing that you can see. And sometimes you can get around that by buying a better scope or putting a 30mm tube optic, as we discussed. I think it was last week before, we discussed tube size. You can buy a bigger tube optic, a 30mm main tube, or this one particular one I use here is 35mm, and that'll generally give you more elevation adjustment or downward adjustment depending on what you need. So adjustments is a consideration for scope height, and again, using that average person framework's not something that's necessarily going to hurt too many people having it up a little bit higher, except for, again, on a 22 or an air rifle might be another scenario where you want a really close zero and you've got really big rings. So we'll jump into the next section, being comfort and consistency. And this is one of my big conversation points during scope height. I think there's been something that's starting to come through our community worldwide. And I think a lot of people have always known about it. Competition shooters, target shooters, we've adopted or treated the issue differently, but we call it natural point of aim, or to sum it up, comfortability with your system. And the reason I've got a few different optics out here mounted up on bang sticks is purely because they are completely different configurations, and I wanted to show what a traditional configuration might be like. I've got the one in front of me here where we've got that very small gap here, and what, say, a competition long range setup might look like, and what that scope height, as you can see in the background here, what it might look like. And comfortability or natural point of aim, really, in my book, in this point can be really summed up together. An old traditional system without an adjustable stock, no length of pull, you've really got the eye relief to work with, or if you needed to get your face off the optic to not just get the right eye relief, but to get the right scope height, you may have needed to strap some tape with a stubby holder on the top or something like that. So these traditional bang sticks have changed, and we get a lot more these days. This is what I would call maybe not the extreme end, but a more commonplace now, both in paddock and on the competition scene. So this, as you can see here, has a very adjustable stock, which means that I can have a high scope height so that my body is in a more, because I'm a big bloke and there's more of me, I've got a fat face, I need to be up off the bang stick a fair bit. So I can actually have a very high sitting up optic, a very high scope mounts, have an adjustable cheek piece, have an adjustable length of pull, and really, particularly for longer range shooting, I can really get that comfortable position that I can sit there all day if I needed to, banging away at steel plates at whatever distance I may feel. So in the modern era, a modular system like this is much more commonplace. So we talk about using not just ballistic solvers, but using a bang stick fit for purpose and purchasing an optic fit for purpose. I've done that here. I've got a system that works for me in the conditions that I want to use it in, and I can have this high scope height that I need for comfortable neck and head positioning, which helps me with the comfortability to dumb it down, or use a simpler term. What I'm really doing there is getting a more natural point of aim. So I'm getting so comfortable behind the system that I can find my natural point of aim. I can close my eyes and take a shot, and it go on the target exactly where it needed to go. There's a good little test. We'll talk about natural point of aim in coming weeks when we get a bit more technical, but being comfortable with your system. If that means I've got a crook neck, I'm a bit older now, I can't get down, or I put on 20 kilos like me. An old clay target shooter once told me to veer off the subject a little bit, that for every 10 kilos you put on a few mils of, sorry, I just got to touch the camera here. You put on a few mils of face, which means that your face sits further off the stock, which means you're struggling to get that right comfortable head placement. Again, that's what systems like this are for, is to get around those issues. You can see now what the different systems are. And I've got another one here. I'll show you. This particular system is somewhere in the middle. So it's a more modern configuration. It has an adjustable cheek piece there where that cutout is. And that's a 50 mil objective. That's a nice that's my hunting 3006. And it's a nice configuration for me. It's not too high and not too low. So again, more commonplace that I'd see these days in store. I hope that stays there. So comfortability, natural point of aim, getting a stable cheek world and getting good position behind your optic will give you a consistent sight pitch. It'll give you, it'll help with parallax. It helps a whole bunch of other things getting the system right, which includes the scope height. Hence why I put so much time into talking about the comfortability or, again, natural point of aim. So I hope that sums that part up. If you've got an older bit of equipment, your body has changed as you've got older. Look at things, whether it be changing stocks, whether it be changing ring height, whether it be changing something about your equipment to help that comfortability point. I'd probably say in kestrels, and this is a point about proper measurement, and I'm going to show you here in a sec how most people would measure their scope height on equipment they already have. So I guess if you're going to start using any ballistic solvers, even if it's just for some muck around steel target shooting on a Sunday afternoon on the farm, and you're going to try and use an app, whether it be ForDoff or Kestrel or Shooter or any number of the apps that are out there these days, I think if you've got the opportunity to put that scope height in and give a proper measurement, you might as well do it. But overall, that measurement, again, for an average user, is not as important in this particular point. But again, we're talking about someone who might be going to use those systems or learn those apps. So I'll show you here the best way I've found to do it. And there's many videos on YouTube, so I'm going to reinvent the wheel here. There's many images online. It's in many books. There's 1,000 people that are smarter than me that can tell you better ways to do it. But this is the practical way that I've learned to do this. So generally what you're trying to do to get your right scope height, particularly if you're just measuring to put it in a ballistic solver, is you want the center line of the bore and you want the center line of the optic. Now, depending on whether you've got some kind of a MOA rail, like this one here's got a 20 MOA rail on it, or you've got a stepped receiver, you can get some funny measurements. So from talking to guys that work for big optical manufacturers that I've been lucky enough to go and see and tour, there's some ingenious ways that you can use to average it out for use in this system. So what we're going to do is get a little tape measure. I like a little tape measure. Again, we don't have to be that precise, but we can be precise in this instance. So let's do our best. You want half the bore and you want the center line of the optic. And scope rings, high quality scope rings, generally a half. They have ring caps, so we'll use that to our advantage as well. So in a lot of stock and rifle combinations, you'll find that the stock quite often goes up to about halfway along the bore around the receiver, which is a really good way to do what we need to do here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, right where that tag is, I'm going to sit my tape on top of that bit of timber there, which is pretty well halfway in the bore. And then I'm going to go to that scope ring half just here, and I'm going to measure that. And we sit there, for all those talking mils and centimeters, we're sitting there at about 46 mil. That's at the front. If I measured at the back here, it's going to be more because Ruger used a stepped receiver. How do I get around that? Well, you can halve it in through the turret. And generally that's what I do with anything I know has a step receiver. Again, using this as an example, that there's a cant on that rail. What I'm going to do is go through the center line of the turret. The turret's actually got a little line there indicating halfway, and I get that 62 mil, no problem at all. And that averages the difference between the front base height and the rear base height. So that'll give you a nice average number to put in your Kestrel or your solver, and that makes a pretty precise measurement. And as I've explained, it doesn't make that much difference anyway when it comes to those longer ranges. So I hope you got something from that, measuring your scope height, halfway in the middle of the optic, halfway in the middle of the bore. That's going to give you the measurement for what you need. I opened up about what dad and grandfather always had, and that was you got to get that optic real low there, so you got to get that real low. I hope we can sort of sum all this up now with this last point. Lower sight heights generally are preferred by a lot of people. Does it make a difference? The answer is probably no. I think the comfortability factor for most people is more important than whether your scope height, 3 mils off the ball, that's terrific, or 3 mils off the barrel, that's terrific. In a hunting scenario, I can imagine, particularly a backpack or a hiking scenario, I can imagine where if you have an optic set up like this one here, that you could get trees, you could get limbs, you could get brush, you could get your backpack, you could get all manner of things stuck underneath here. So I understand, dropping that optic down in real hiking, spot and stalk type environment, that can make a big difference. So I'll go along with that in that scenario, but it still circles back to the same thing that we talk about every week. Configure the thing for what you're doing. Bang sticks like golf. A driver doesn't do what a putter does, and a putter doesn't do what a driver does. A shotgun doesn't do what an air rifle does, and so on and so forth. So when you're setting something up, even if you're trying to have something to try and do a little bit of it all, a multi-purpose bang stick or optic combination, just have a little think and think to yourself with scope height, does those few mils make a difference? Do I need to go and spend, let's say, a set of rings, a Weaver style set of rings are $120 for a decent set? Do I really need to go and spend that money just to drop it down 2 or 3 millimeters? The answer is no, particularly in my point of view and for an average hunter. But if you've got short neck or your body configuration means that you can't get down on that, behind that, to get that comfortability in the neutral point of aim sorted out in the correct eye box and the correct eye relief, by all means, go and mount it low. But I think you can understand the point that we're coming from. There's a whole bunch of technical stuff here that really proves it doesn't make a whole lot of difference when you're shooting past what your zero range is. It only really makes a difference if you're going to go to the polar opposite, being trying to shoot at 10 yards. And you can really get away with some of that anyway if you're using a good optic that will parallax down, so side focus or adjustable objective up here. That if you can parallax down to 10 yards, you're probably going to take a fair bit of that issue away as well. I hope that sums it up. In summary, it doesn't drastically change your bullet trajectory. Proper sight height can depend on how you need it set up for your shooting style or how you're going to use it. Just checking my notes here, because comfort and consistency still should be your primary goal to make that good shot. Looking through the center of the optic is always much better than looking through the side or the top. And again, that gets back to this setup that we talk about and comfortability behind it, making sure your gear fits you. Look, we can get through this a little bit more if someone's got a question. If we've got any questions out there, thanks, Dougie, for hanging in there. We're doing well. Thanks to all the people that are watching this on YouTube. I think next, there's one thing that I haven't covered in this that I think I should touch on, and that's that in combination with scope height, an incorrect level can cause you some issues. So making sure that when you're setting the scope height, that your system is level, your reticle is level, that's something that does have a bearing on the whole setup of that system. So we're going to talk about that next week. little bit of a teaser here. I've got a few out. I'm going to talk about scope levels and some little systems that you can use to help get your system level. And I hope that you'll tune in next week to have a bit of a listen about that, because scope height is a little bit like camber, caster, and toe on a car. If they're all out, they will have an effect on each other. So let's talk about that next week. I think that's a good point to leave off there. If you've got any questions, please drop a comment. We'll start a conversation below. If you want to watch it in high resolution instead of our poor 720p here in rural Australia, that poor internet connection, it'll be on 4K tonight or tomorrow on YouTube. Just a bit of a postscript before I go. Thanks to all the people that reached out and checked in on me and mine regarding my young boy. He had his open heart surgery on the 4th of October, and he's doing really, really well. And I thank this great community of people in this industry, family and friends, for reaching out and, sending us best wishes and thinking about us over the last couple of weeks. He's at home doing really well. And again, thanks everyone for their kind words and well wishes in recent weeks. That's all for us. Again, thanks our title sponsor, Outback Optics, for making this possible, to help me buy some camera equipment and that sort of stuff. So, if you need to have a look at an optic, particularly if you're looking for some of these general hunting optics, go to www.outbackoptics.com.au, hit their retailer tab. They're just about to go live on a website update. I'm helping them proofread that as we speak. So sign off this week. Thanks very much. We'll talk about some levels and camp next week, and stay focused out there. Thanks for your support.